All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to give it some time to let a few people join. This was pretty much last minute. I think we decided 2 days before that we're going to do this because Chris has had a very busy schedule and it's been difficult to kind of coordinate and get together. But that being said, both of us really want to do this because I'm not sure if any of you saw Chris's post the other day, the impact that books like this have on the little ones out there. And I just, really want this book to get into the hands of every person I know, at least. So, that being said, Chris, how have you been? Can you give some updates?
Happy and also very busy, pretty much drained. But I'm about halfway through with this month of events I've got going on, and um, learning how to look after myself during the whole absolute chaos of it all. It's all positive chaos, so I've got that going for me. But at the same time, uh, it's a good opportunity to learn things about how to best spend your energy.
Well, self care and boundaries, right? So, you eventually save yourself a burnout when you do that. So I'm glad you're doing that. I saw your posts a couple of days ago, and I was so happy that you were actually thinking about, okay, I need to stay free, keep my mind free for this purpose and that purpose, and I'm glad you did that.
Yeah,
um,
thank you.
for the book, I remember, as far as I remember, in by the end of chapter 18, they realized that Tyler had picked up Shannon from the place where they were, I think, and it was a very graphic scene, as far as I remember.
Yeah.
Do you mind recapping that?
Yeah, sure. Can I say it's also, even though the book was published years ago, it's always weird hearing other people coming to me and saying, "Oh yeah, Ewan did this, Shannon did that." It's like the in my head these are still characters who only kind of exist up here, but other people in other countries are talking to me about them now, and it's just yeah, a bit of a side note, but that's still quite amazing to me, really. But okay, so yes, in that final chapter. Um, I should probably mention where the strike team currently are. Oh yes, the they now only have two handguns, if I remember rightly, between them after this guy calling himself the Lord and his henchmen stole this enormous minigun that they have, and basically every other weapon that they have, making the possibility of escape somewhat more remote. And that's the last we heard of them, because then it went to Mark and his strike team trying to find what was going on at Lieutenant Lambourne's headquarters, only to find everyone there dead, including Lieutenant Lambourne. And it turns out that there were just a bunch of survivors at this clinic, and uh, Shannon, it finishes with Raj saying Shannon wasn't being taken here by Keith Tyler; she was being taken from here.
Shannon is
Chapter
very
19 is where you
mysterious.
get a bit more of an explanation.
I feel like Shannon, I would like to know more about her, but you're like leaning into those details very slowly. I feel like we'll discover more about Shannon by the end of the book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
think I'm giving anything much in the way of spoilers by saying that yes, information about Shannon does get revealed.
Okay. All right.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready for? Oh, thank you, Rafe. Right. So, are we ready for chapter 19?
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 19. Ian Marshall approached the door, an impatient march in his step left over from his army days. You may remember Ian Marshall is the head of military,
Yeah.
like kind of sort of Nicholas Grant's second in command. You've got Nicholas Grant, and then you've got Ian Marshall and Nathaniel Pierce, and then you've got 14-year-old Oliver Roth as their assassin. It was a time for actions rather than meetings, but nonetheless a meeting had been called, and it made no sense for the architect to meet him as low down as 4G. Nearly 48 hours had passed since the rebels had broken into the inner city, and the hole in the wall had not yet been fixed. Oh yeah, that's my way of saying that the strike team, yeah, about 2 days have passed since we last saw them. It may have been guarded day and night with bio rifle soldiers, But Marshall had more faith in reinforced concrete. He walked through the door to find Nathaniel Pierce on the other side. That alone made his bad day worse. Grant's head of military stood less than a metre from his chief of scientific research, and the tension between them could be sensed like the push of two repelling magnets. Marshall noticed the window to his left and realised why he was on floor G, the level that held the interrogation chambers. He was on the comfortable side of the two-way mirror, away from the clinically tiled floors and polished tables of tools and blades. Through the glass, Oliver Roth danced a knife between his fingers in front of a suitably terrified man. "Who the hell is that?" asked Marshall. "Your 14-year-old assassin," replied Pierce. "The man next to him, you simpleton. Adnan Shah." "And who the hell is Adnan Shah?" "The architectural consultant for the Northern Wall," said Pierce. "2 days have passed without a full repair, so I thought a little professional encouragement was needed." A scream came from the other side of the mirror. Marshall grunted to himself. "Nat," he started, "I know military strategy isn't your strong point, so let me give you some friendly advice. There's no point in tormenting someone without a crystal clear objective. Before you go diving in with knives, you have to know what you want first. Maybe you should give your boy the same advice." Marshall glanced at Oliver Roth, who seemed to be enjoying himself. There was no denying Pierce's point. "So what's your objective?" Marshall asked. "To make Shah snap his fingers and instantly fix the wall? We're not talking about those clones you grow in a couple of hours. Materials take time to gather. Walls take time to reconstruct. Wet concrete takes time to set." "Yes," said Pierce. "He tried telling us that." Marshall frowned from one corner of his mouth. It was dumbfounding to think that once upon a time Nathaniel Pierce had been his best friend. Marshall Contractors, later Marshall Pierce Solutions, had been the perfect recovery from 12 years in the armed forces, followed by a bloody dangerous career as an arms dealer. Positive relationships meant everything in that profession, and when the warlords started to grow weary of Marshall, running a safe business at home seemed like the way to go. Better to quit while you're still alive. He had pulled Pierce from the teeth of bankruptcy, a move which seemed like a good idea at the time. Ian and Nat made a fortune together until a well-mannered, eccentric character by the name of Nicholas Grant walked in, bought the company, and walked out again. Neither Marshall nor Pierce could get their heads around it. The son of Francis Grant, oil tycoon billionaire, had cashed out and switched professions. Most people in the dying fossil fuel industry had jumped ship to the rise of renewable energy, but Nicholas Grant had bought a security company. It was inexplicable. Another yell from behind the glass returned Marshall to his senses. "We don't have time for this," he said. "Don't wait yourself," said Pierce. "He's made of flesh, and flesh has nerve cells. He'll give in." "And do what?" "Admit his incompetence. We can't shoot him just because concrete takes too long to dry. It'd be unfair dismissal." Marshall shot Pierce a disgusted glare. "That's your objective? Get him to incriminate himself, then replace him with someone else?" "He's had 2 days, Ian." Marshall looked through the mirror at a man who pleaded for a chance to do his job, tormented by the same teenage boy who had fired the laser cannon through his wall in the first place. Marshall truly missed the Oliver Roth he had first come to know, the handsome 12-year-old with a brilliant intellect and a taste for adventure. Plucking him out of Marshall Pierce's youth training program had been a brave but foolhardy move, a long story, and one which Nicholas Grant could never find out about. Have I actually explained to you why Oliver Roth was promoted so quickly?
Nope,
I
not
don't
that
think
I
I
know.
have. I can't remember whereabouts it's revealed, but yeah, a long story and one which Nicholas Grant could never find out about. But that cheeky, daring boy was gone, replaced by the teenager behind the glass. Like child stars who grew up in the limelight and became drug addicts, Oliver Roth had neither the wisdom nor the role models to know how to handle his newfound power. "I never thought I'd miss Keith Tyler," Marshall thought to himself. The man may have been impossible to get on with, but he had been far more professional in carrying out his business. The thought of Tyler triggered a separate issue in his head. Half a week had passed since the incident, and it was time to stop avoiding the issue. "We need to talk about Shannon," he said. Pierce gave him eye contact for the first time in weeks, the surprise visible in his face. "What about her?" "It's about time we admitted she might be a problem. A dead problem, Ian. Have you seen her body?" Pierce gave no answer, and turned his head back to the horror show. "Here are the facts," Marshall continued regardless. "First, Keith called me from Hartford, telling me he'd killed everyone except her, including little Lambo, I remember." Marshall nodded, with a discreet frown. As professional as Tyler had been, Marshall dreaded to think what he had done to Anthony Lamborn in the end. "Then later that evening," he continued, "he called half a mile from New London, asking for access through the security gate. He hung up in a rush, saying something about Shannon killing his clones. She grabbed a knife and killed them while he was distracted by the phone. Oh yeah, and several months ago we read about the strike team discovering those dead clone bodies before they broke in. Maybe Lambo taught us some of his fancy pants knife stuff, or maybe the clones were under orders not to hurt her. Anyway, that was the last I ever heard from him. A few hours later, he stopped checking in, and my scouting team found his body later that night. 100-ish stab wounds. Shannon killed him single-handed, so I'm willing to bet she's still alone out there. Even Nick isn't asking us to search for her. If the great Nicholas Grant says she's not a problem, she's not a problem. Nick was always tricky when it came to Shannon, muttered Marshall. Maybe he does and doesn't want her dead. Well, she is dead, Ian, said Pierce. She had one chance at survival, and she stabbed it to death. She's more resourceful than you think. Lambo was the resourceful one. Shannon was a jumped-up bystander. And now she's a dead bystander, who probably died of thirst in a field somewhere. She's not dead until I see her body. Then send your boy, Pierce finished with his trademark smarmy grin. If he gets stabbed to death too, we'll know you're right. Marshall had spent a whole military career keeping his impulses under control, and 8 years as an arms dealer being patient with monstrous people. At that moment, he did neither. Instead, he raised a clenched fist and smashed it into Nathaniel Pierce's nose. Pierce barely remained on his feet and clutched his face as 2 nostrils worth of blood began to dribble. The look in his face was one of surprise rather than shock or horror. You apathetic, feeble-minded moron, yelled Marshall as his former best friend steadied himself. You imprison and torture torture the best man for fixing the ball, the most useful guy on our payroll right now, including you. You use one of my staff to do your dirty work, then joke about him dying like Keith. You make assumptions about Shannon based on nothing more than wishful thinking. You have literally no idea how to solve anything unless you can throw clones at it. Now listen to me, because I'm telling you what's going to happen with the wall. Pierce took his hand away from his wreck of a nose and listened as if the punch had never happened. First off, said Marshall, Oliver's going to let Shah go and pretend the whole thing was just a warning. Then you let him get back to work. We keep the bi-rifle soldiers in place at the hole right up until Shah tells us the concrete is set. In the meantime, Grant wants the new prisoners dead right now, and I've got a plan. The daily food drops in half an hour, and we're going to disappoint them. There came a scream, blunted by the double-glazed window. Then an inaudible sentence from Roth, punctuated with laughter. Marshall bit his lip. Worried about him? Pierce asked with a grin. Marshall sneered. It's times like this I'm glad I spent my life in the violence business, he said, rather than shutting myself away in a lab somewhere. Bet this freaks you out. Honestly, it doesn't, Pierce replied, with very little emotion to show for his words. I've spent my life in biological science, and my clone research was so secret that I didn't even look for ethics approval. So I've dissected apes for anatomical research. I've poisoned dogs alongside clones just to compare how their bodies reacted to ice and gas. I performed autopsies on clones that I've personally put to death, or just close to death in some cases. Marshall gave no response beyond a blank expression, as Pierce withdrew a handkerchief from his shirt pocket and wiped the blood from his face. Truthfully, Pierce said, when I look in there, all I see is meat, and meat doesn't scare me. Okay, paragraph break. We're halfway through the chapter now. Yeah, that was actually a little bit more graphic than I remember it being. The whole book is, to be honest.
It is very graphic. I have a question though. So I was under the impression that Shannon, was kind of very important for Nicholas and his army. And it seems like when these two are talking, it seems like they don't, I mean, at least one of them doesn't know how important she is or the harm that she can cause to their army. So is that the case that they don't know and only Keith knew?
It's complicated. What they were talking about there was her importance and also lack of importance to Nicholas Grant. I cannot explain any more than that. What they are totally unaware of is the threat that she poses to the clone factory, because you and I know that she found the Underdogs and pretty much immediately told them about a USB stick that can be used to destroy the clone factory. They don't know that. They have no idea that Anthony Lambourne and Shannon were working on that. The threat that Marshall sees is that she knows a lot about New London that the Underdogs don't know, and also the fact that if there's someone like that who may or may not be alive, he has got to be uncompromisingly careful and assume that she is alive and must assume that she's a threat.
Okay, well, you're
Mm.
good at keeping secrets, though, Chris, without giving too much away.
Thank you.
I think that makes you a good author. one
Well,
of the
thank you.
things, one of the things that makes you a good author.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, second half of the chapter. Ewan checked his watch again, as discreetly as he could. It was one of his last remaining possessions. 11 o'clock, April 27th. Feeding time. Bloody hell, we've been in this ward pressure cooker for nearly 2 days. He had joined Charlie and Kate in a mass gathering for the daily food drop, accompanied by Patrick and Ruth. For anyone who needs to remember, Patrick and Ruth are like the parents in this family of four, and they've got two adult sons in their early 20s, Aidan and Benjamin. They had left Jack and the sons in the shelter to guard the rucksack of gadgets. Besides the binoculars, door combination hacker, and the other non-combat tools, it contained 2 more smoke grenades and a small stick of dynamite. There'd be a fat lot of good inside the inner city, but they were worth guarding. Ewan found himself among a growing crowd of emaciated faces, who had been forced on an 11-month diet of just enough food but little more. Grant may have ensured that there was enough for all, but some had managed to seize more than others. I wonder if they'll send me some birthday cake tomorrow, Charlie joked at his side. They'll do that for me, won't they, for my sweet 16th? Oh, great, he's making jokes about imprisonment. The first step towards accepting it. Pretty sure it'll be the same as yesterday, Patrick answered. Bread, processed biscuit, bottled water, and mass-farmed veg. Mass-farmed veg. Sorry, Charlie. What's the time? Asked Ruth. Exactly 11, answered Ewan. They're later than yesterday. Can't even see them in the distance. His eyes wandered to his podcopter wound. It didn't look good. He had taken the bandage off a few hours ago to find that his forearm had changed colour. It was infected, not a shadow of a doubt, and the surface of his skin looked like it was crying out for help. He had hidden the wound from his friends as much as possible, as well as his terrified reaction. Another week without Lorraine's medicines, and the infection would do Grant's job for him. Ewan looked among the crowd and saw 1,000 faces as worried as his. What's up? He whispered. This is the first time the food's ever been late, whispered Patrick. After nearly a year. Literally, first time. Ewan glanced around and caught 3 separate people looking at him. Even after 2 days, the stares from the locals were still frequent. Ewan and his friends had spent most of their lives being stared at, but this time it was different. There were 4 combat-suited teenagers in a world without soldiers, known only for their sudden appearance from nowhere. People were curious, but afraid to speak. Afraid to ask. Ewan turned and tapped his friends on the shoulders. We should leave, he whispered. What? Asked Kate. You're not hungry? The food's not coming, and the reason doesn't even matter. When a crowd gets scared, they blame the odd ones out. I actually think that's one of the most profound things that Ewan
It is.
says throughout the entire series, because we see that in history, don't we?
We
When a crowd
do.
gets scared, they blame the odd ones out.
That's true.
Kate and Charlie wasted no time in following him, as the crowd's whispers grew in the air like the build-up of static electricity. In the 5 minutes it took to get to the Rowlands' house, Ewan was astonished at the deafening volume 1,000 whispers could reach. Jack rose from his seat in surprise. What happened? Food fairy didn't come? Yeah, something like that. Aidan and Benjamin looked at one another, sharing the same anxious faces as the crowd outside. Ewan beckoned the underdogs together, and they huddled in the middle of the room like a sports team before a tense match. Things need to change, he began, with droplets of sweat emerging on his forehead. And fast. McCormick must think we're dead. Grant's up to something with the food, and before long the locals will turn on us, and we're putting the Rowlands in danger by sheltering under their roof. Then there's your arm, said Jack. You need antibiotics or you'll be dead within a week. Ewan stared at him wide-eyed. You didn't think we'd notice? Asked Kate. We've got to break out. For your sake, even if nothing else. It wasn't a subject Ewan wanted to talk about, but he smiled on the inside. It was good to have friends looking out for him. That hole we made to the outer city, he said. It's the only way out. Now, why on earth didn't we think of that before? Asked Charlie with exaggerated sarcasm. Because an hour after we broke in, we lost our weapons. There's a right way to get through that hole, but it's not by copying the locals. The clones covered the hole with wood so they can rebuild it from the inside, which means they won't see us approaching. But time's running out. Jack took the group's last 2 pistols from his belt and held one lightly in each hand. I'm up for it if you are, he said, but the probability of success is pretty much 0. Not if we get the minigun back, said Ewan. I'm going to find the Lord. It's time to negotiate. End of chapter 19. And a quarter of the way through the evening. or afternoon where
Okay,
you are.
just want to know what happens next. Like at this point, I feel like.
Okay. Should we go straight into chapter 20 then?
uh, does anyone, Rufe, Aman, Aisha, Steph, do you guys have anything to ask, or we can move on? Yes, that's true.
Yeah, okay.
All right, I think so. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank
Sorry.
you. I think one great thing about reading through Underdogs 1 as part of Kind Theory is that I've spent so much time with my head in the final Underdogs book, and also dealing with the recent publication. Well, I suppose not so recent now, of Acceleration. Acceleration being the most intense thing I've ever written. That when you've written two books like that, you look back at Underdogs 1 and you think, oh well, because it's gone up so much. Maybe Underdogs 1 was. I wish I could kind of go back in time and just improve my first book, but it's not until I read this that I realise actually I may have been underestimating my first novel. It is actually really intense, and I'd forgotten how intense it actually was.
It is very intense, especially towards these chapters. Like later in the book, it gets more and
Yeah.
more intense.
On a similar note, here's chapter 20.
Okay.
Half of, half of the crowd had dispersed by the time Ewan made his journey. The other half had probably worked out that their owners didn't plan to feed them that day, but their desperation was powerful enough to keep them in place. Ewan stood 100 meters from the Lord's current shelter, his hands fidgeting beyond his control. You don't have to do this, said Charlie at his side. You're betting your life on it working. We'll never break out with two handguns. And besides, Ewan said, showing his arm with its pus-filled sacks lining the podcopter wound, I'd rather die today if I'm dying here at all. Ewan had already said his goodbyes to Kate, Jack, and the Rowlands, pretending not to believe they were final. Kate had demanded he'd go unarmed, claiming that the Lord would see any weapon as a sign of aggression rather than protection. Her insistence had only triggered Ewan's PDA and guaranteed he would be defiant enough to take one. He wondered how much of his defiance had been because of her relationship with Raj. Remember that remember that time where Ewan suddenly found out, whilst kind of hoping to get romantically involved with Kate, actually I'm going out with Raj. And this is him kind of processing that.
I still can't believe it though.
Over the last couple of days, he had come to realise that his warm feelings for Kate were of friendship rather than romance, but she had still turned him down. That was okay; she had every right to, and in her position, Ewan would have done the same. But he wasn't going to lie to himself and pretend it didn't hurt. But he had taken the news better than he had predicted, largely because he cared about Kate and her right to make her own decisions. Ewan may have had a great myriad of problems, but misogyny was not one of them. His parents had left him under no illusion about the importance of respecting women. Maybe Mum and Dad were lucky. If Major George West and his wife were going to die anywhere, at least they died without seeing this place. How are you feeling? Asked Charlie. I mean, stupid question, I know, but it's fine to be scared. Ewan closed his eyes and tried his best to put his thoughts into words. I know that death should scare me, he started, but it doesn't. There's something scarier, and I've seen it in here. What's that? It was a topic he didn't feel comfortable discussing, but somehow it seemed okay to tell his temper to win. Death's bad enough, Ewan said, but surviving and losing your humanity? Tiptoeing around death long enough to lose yourself as a person? It's happened to people we've met here. It happened to the Lord and his guys. And if you stay here, it'll happen to you. That's my biggest fear, including death. Charlie placed a hand on Ewan's shoulder. Affection was rare from Charlie. He neither gave hugs in his best moods or received them in his worst. Before Oakenfold, Charlie said, the teachers spent years trying to make us act like everyone else. We couldn't do it back then, and we won't do it now. Ewan couldn't help but smile. His friend had a point. Charlie, he said, there's something I need to give you. I don't do kisses, mate. Yeah, as if you're my type. Here, take this. Shannon's USB stick had been zipped inside Ewan's left pocket for 2 days, his hand patting it once an hour to double, triple, and quadruple check it was still there. He fetched it out, the words better days worn and smudged, and handed it to Charlie. I don't have a clue what to do with this. If this meeting goes wrong but you guys escape anyway, work out what to do. Charlie bit his lip, but took the device from his friend regardless. This doesn't give you permission to die, he said. It's not your permission to give. Anyway, you've still got your phone, right? Yeah? Take photos of this place. The others need to know what the prisoners are going through. Then go to the toilet block and guard Kate while she phones McCormick. Charlie took a confused step backward. The constant threat of tracking technology had kept their phones in their pockets for 2 days straight. In Grant's position, Ewan would have been scanning the whole of Citadel non-stop, waiting for the underdogs to give their location away by phoning home. You sure? Charlie asked. One frequency scan and we're caught. It's been 2 days. They might have given up scanning for us. But knowing McCormick, he'll have kept the comms units guarded since the beginning. He deserves to know we're alive. Why don't you make the call before you leave? You know, just in case. Because I'm leaving now. Besides, it might be Raj who answers. Yeah, so? I kind of made a move on his girlfriend a few days ago. He doesn't know, but I'd feel awkward. Just do this for me, mate. Ewan took advantage of Charlie's confused pause and started his jog. According to the Rowlands, the Lord and his henchmen didn't have a home. The last gang in power had made that mistake. Don Maggio and his mafia-style family might as well have drawn a giant target on the door of their shelter, and were helpless when the Lord, Dave, Sean, Gareth, and Potts struck in the early hours. The Lord had learned from Don Maggio's mistake, and commanded his empire under the roof of a different prisoner each night. It kept him safe from planned attacks, and his subordinates were forced to see their self-proclaimed master face to face, while personally catering for his needs. But Ewan didn't take long to find him. He had never seen the bodyguards' faces, but he recognized superiority complex when he saw it. The guards were stood on the thin streets as if they owned them. He had no idea which henchman he met eyes with, but it did not matter. The four couldn't have shared a full personality between them. If you spend enough time pretending to be someone you're not, Ewan thought, eventually your real personality fades away. It's happened to these guys, and now their tough guy disguises are the only part of them left. Sad, really. Stood before a tall, shaven-headed bringer of death, he did his best to remember that he was the great Ewan West, the leader of countless charges against the greatest foe Britain had ever known. Oh, and the young man who had destroyed a podcopter with his bare hands. I would like to speak to the Lord, he breathed, in a voice that balanced respect and confidence in the best way he knew how. It was difficult, given that he didn't respect them and didn't feel confident either. His polite gesture was met with a predictable flurry of hands searching his body, and he was pinned against the wall by the muzzles of half a dozen firearms. He recognized 3 of the guns from the armory back at Spitfire's Rise, one of which had the knife mark that he had placed there himself. He suppressed his bubbling anger as well as he could. That had been his weapon, even among his peers. The Lord poked an interesting pair of eyes around the entrance, saw Ewan's combat gear, and grinned. Parasite's armed, a henchman snarled. Ewan felt a sharp jerk from the back of his trousers as his handgun was ripped from its holster, and he heard the cocking of several firearms before the Lord raised a firm hand. You don't touch him, Potts, he said. That's their leader. If he wants a chat, he can have one. Disarm him and let him in. I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to do the inner New London accent, British inner city New London accent so badly that people from Texas can't decipher what I'm actually saying. After a search for bladed weapons, Ewan was permitted inside the house under armed guard from Potts and one of the others. The Lord sat in the centre of the one-armed shelter, at a table that had once been somebody's back door. The original homeowner sat trembling at his side. So you come here to kill me, the Lord said without aggression or alarm. That's not the way I do things. Then what are you doing here, whatever your name is? West. Private West. Ewan hoped that faking a military background would earn some respect. He knew enough from his father to blag his way through most questions. Bit young, ain't you? I've come with peaceful intentions on behalf of my squaddies, Ewan continued, to ask for our minigun back. You have my word, it will never be used against you or your interests. The Lord spat out a laugh, so loud and so sudden that the other 2 henchmen ran to the door. You know, there was something wrong with every sentence there. You came in peace carrying a gun. You asked for your minigun when it fell from the sky. You say you won't act against our interests whilst asking for our biggest weapon. Does this mean you won't negotiate? The Lord gave a loose glance to the ceiling, considering the question. He then pointed a thumb towards their frightened host, who sat deep in his seat as if magnetized to it, and spoke to one of his men. Dave, get rid of him. The command was followed by a single bullet fired from the gun that had once belonged to Charlie. With no time for a reaction before he died, the homeowner fell from his chair with the same scared expression on his face. You idiot! The Lord shouted, rising from his stool. I meant get him out of the house, not get rid of him. Oh, answered Dave. Sorry, bruv, you just said, I just what? Nothing, mate, sorry. Put him outside. Sean, help him. Dave took Charlie's weapon back in his belt and nudged for Sean to help him with the body. The Lord returned his glance to Ewan, the dead host forever gone from his mind. In the short silence that followed, Ewan realised he had been no more shocked by the man's death than the Lord had been. The inner city was eating his humanity, and the fear he had confessed to Charlie had taken gentle steps close to reality. He had to get his team out of here. I spent my whole life thinking I was less human than other people, he thought, thanks to everyone telling me my brain was faulty. Today, I'm fighting to remain one of the most human people in New London. So he came to negotiate, continued the Lord. There's nothing to say. You've nothing to offer me. There's a way out of the citadel, said Ewan, his heart leaping up his chest when he realised he had interrupted the Lord. But not without weapons. You have my word as an honourable British soldier. If you return our weapons, we will fight a way out and you will never see us again. The Lord's expression changed, his lips pressing together and his eyebrows deepening. Ewan tried to read his scarred face, but it was difficult to interpret. Did he think Ewan was lying? Insane? Did he see this as a pathetic attempt at deceit? Tell me the way out, Private, he commanded. You must have seen that hole in the outer city wall, answered Ewan. The one that's been boarded up, about to be concreted, with scum soldiers guarding every square inch of it? Ewan noticed that the Lord had lost his grunting, lazy tone. He sounded like an actual person, with a hint of a Welsh accent. Every day there's a nice pile of bodies building up beneath it, the Lord continued. They all have the same idea as you. They weren't armed. You won't be either, answered the Lord as he slouched back and put his feet up on the dead man's chair, because there's no way in hell you're taking our weapons. Why would you want to escape anyway? There's nothing out there anymore. Here we've got free food, no taxes, no morning rush hour, no parking tickets, and no reality TV. Living the dream. Living your dream, nobody else's. Our friends are on the outside, Ewan answered, and we have to get back to them. Then why'd you come here in the first place? Unhappy accident. Look, mate, you say there's nothing I can offer, but there is. You'd get to have a front row seat in watching loads of enemy soldiers getting slaughtered. You and your friends can watch in glee as those prison guards get what's coming to them. Tell me honestly, can you really resist that? The early stages of a smile broke across the Lord's face. The bodyguards at the entrance had full grins. Ewan had walked into the wolves' lair just hoping to walk out in one piece, but found himself on the winning side of a negotiation. His optimism was shot down by the Lord's response. It's like this, Private. That would be nice to watch, but only today. Tomorrow, the guards will be replaced. We'll be left without our biggest weapon, and the fatherless are just dying for a chance to jump us and take power. We're keeping our guns, mate, and there's not a damn thing on earth you can say to make me change my mind. The Lord stood up from his chair and headed for the entrance door, bringing the moments Ewan had feared most, his attempt to leave. But the thing is, the Lord finished, I respect you. You're not actually a bad guy. You ain't getting your weapons, but I'll let you live. Have fun in town, Private West. Ewan dared to smile as he stood up. The Lord has blessed me with the gift of life, he thought with a grin. I wonder if Raj would find that funny. He had taken 3 steps towards the doorframe when a voice boomed out from loudspeakers across the citadel. It must have echoed from one end of the inner city to the other. The Lord and his henchmen leapt in shock. Such announcements must have been rare. Ladies and gentlemen of the citadel, this is Nicholas Grant. Nicholas bloody Grant. Up to that moment, Ewan had only known the tyrant as a name and a reputation. Suddenly he had a very real voice, and it violated his ears with deafening power and clarity. You've starved your people for half a day, Ewan thought. What have you been building up to? Today's delivery of food and water has been cancelled, continued the voice of Nicholas Grant, and all future deliveries have been suspended. Now, those of you in the northern region may have noticed the sudden presence of 4 strangers. These teenagers are dangerous, to my soldiers and to all of you. Ewan's feet anchored themselves to the ground in fright, and his stomach started to weaken. Grant's voice oozed confidence and authority, in a way that the Lord and even McCormick never managed. These strangers are named as follows, said Grant. Charlie Coleman, a troublesome boy with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and uncontrolled anger issues. Kate Arrowsmith, an autistic school dropout with severe anxiety disorder. Jack Hopper, a teenager with Asperger's syndrome who has failed in 2 suicide attempts so far. You don't actually know that? That is breaking news. The reader does not know that about Jack until now. And their leader is Ewan West, a 16-year-old problem child with autism and pathological demand avoidance who was permanently expelled from 6 different schools. Making us sound as worthless as possible, Ewan thought. I know where you're going with this. Ewan checked the walls for other exits, but found none. The Lord was standing at the entrance, his expression morphing from respect to hostility. A pistol lay gripped in his hand. They both knew Grant's final sentences before they were spoken. These four are your enemies, Grant finished, as the Lord raised his handgun to the height of Ewan's forehead. And you will put these parasites to death. There'll be no more food or water drops anywhere across New London until I've recovered all four of their dead bodies. End of chapter 20. It's a good job you asked for 4 chapters tonight.
I did. I'm glad I did. But that's one thing. So when I read a book, I kind of visualize what's happening. And given that Ewan is autistic, Kate is autistic, Charlie is an ADHDer, I am just thinking that they've had to deal with a lot of unexpected situations, very stressful, overwhelming situations. And even thinking about it, I can't muster up the courage to do what they're doing. And so I can only imagine how stressful it is for them. And
Yeah,
I'm just,
they are brave.
thinking, how are they keeping their
Extremely brave
meltdowns
people.
away?
Mm. Imagine it's probably the fact that they've got stuff to focus on.
Yep.
By the way, I almost spat out my drink with laughter when Steph wrote UB. Uh, did you know the significance of using that phrase at that moment, Steph? Because I'm going to have to explain to people now. So, Julie, my partner, back when I was writing the first draft of this, um, we were friends at the time. She didn't become my partner for another couple of years, but she was. I thought you might. So, yeah, she was one of the very early readers of this. She was the biggest Underdogs fan before Underdogs was even published. And when she read the end of chapter 20, she shouted out, yeah, a bit of a language warning, but her actual response to reading the end of that chapter was, utter bastard. And
Kind of
yeah,
felt the
she
same
told
way.
me that, oh, yeah, she's called me worse since then. Um, in fact, because you're American, I can say that, actually, wait, no, I can't, because the first word gives away a spoiler, but the second word was wanker. Um, there was something even worse in book 3, but most hurtfully of all, there's a chapter in book 4 which we don't talk about.
Okay.
There's no
Okay.
hurtful words. It is the chapter that Julie and I don't talk about.
Okay.
Anyway, so UB became her nickname for me for a long time. And yeah, always spat out my drink when Steph types UB because, wait, hold on. So you've not known what the ending of chapter 20 is, but I must have mentioned somewhere in the past that at the end of chapter 20, I got called an utter bastard. And you've been saving that stuff, haven't you? Because that's impressive. Well done.
Well, I'm just thinking. So the fourth book, the chapter in the fourth book is going to be more intense than this?
Well, it's not so much about intensity, it's about how much things hurt.
No, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a
Talk
story about a
about more.
war. Yeah, that's one thing I say when talking about this book, including like when I'm selling it on bookstores. If the person who's if the person who's looking to buy the book is autistic, one thing is to say, by the way, I promise that these character arcs don't involve overcoming their autism. No, they don't. They become the best autistic people that they can be. And Kate, with her anxiety, over the course of the series, she does not become less anxious. She doesn't overcome her anxiety. Wars don't work like that.
They
So
don't. Hmm.
yeah, people call me quite a few rude names when I write hurtful things. But to be fair, this is a war that starts with a mass murder and the total destruction of a country. Anyway, with
Brace
that said,
yourselves.
would you like chapter 21?
Yes, please.
There was a moment of hesitance there, wasn't there?
Well, I kind of peeked on the first sentence, and I'm thinking I can now imagine them. Well, I'm not going to give a spoiler, but I'm thinking it
Okay.
might not be what I was scared of, so I'm kind of looking forward to it now.
Okay. Chapter 21. Kate was undecided about the existence of miracles, but there was no other way to describe the timing. She had made it to the toilet block moments before Nicholas Grant's voice had boomed across the citadel, and the others had secured the entrance as he had finished his death threat. He switched. She switched on her mobile phone, although her quivering thumb needed several attempts to hit the right button. The worst dictator in British history just mentioned me by name. Then he shared my biggest weakness with millions of people. And after that, he told them to kill me. She was okay for now. The toilet block had only one entrance for Charlie to guard, which was fortunate since he held the team's last remaining handgun, and there must have been 100 people in the growing crowd outside ready to charge the block. Even then, Kate still felt the temptation to peek outside, just in case James was one of them. Then a gunshot sounded. Kate dropped the phone in fright and brought her hands to her mouth. The gunshot hadn't come from Charlie. It had been somewhere in the distance, perhaps a mile away. The only armed gang within a mile of the block were Ewan and the Lord's gang, and they were probably stood next to each other. Oh no, if the Lord shot first? Every negative possibility ran through Kate's mind. The positive ones politely stayed at the back of the queue and let her anxiety do the talking. Ewan's weapon had been found and he had been murdered as punishment, or he had shot himself to avoid a prolonged death, or he had fired a warning shot and was trying to sneak his way free, or, most likely of all, the Lord had simply heard Grant's threat and shot Ewan dead. Kate, whispered Jack, I'm sorry, but your 3 minutes have started. Kate looked to the floor. Her phone was powered up. She had never been less ready to talk in her life, but out of habit, she leapt out of her comfort zone anyway. As she picked up her phone, her thoughts turned to Jack, that wonderful friend who Grant had presented to New London in a dreadful light. Jack's brain had always been a complex and interesting place, complex enough to have masked a hurtful history she could never have known. Kate could hardly turn to him and say, Jack, I'm so sorry you tried to kill yourself twice, but she wanted to express some kind of sympathy. Don't see him any differently, she told herself. Grant wants it, and Jack doesn't deserve it. She shook her head and rechecked the row of toilet holes for a fourth time. They were still alone, and the block still stank to holy hell. It had a thickness to its air, a dreadful darkness, and enough fumes to give her coughing fits. The block's single exit served it as its only ventilation and light source. The sensory onslaught had reduced her brain to a foggy mush, and combined with her survival anxiety, she could barely function as a human. But it was the best place to be. If Charlie hadn't run back in time with Ewan's message, the locals could have mown through the Rowlands' home and physically ripped them to shreds. Kate dialed the number for comms and ducked at the sound of another gunshot. This one had been close. Charlie had spent a bullet fighting the crowd backwards, and it had been enough. For another few minutes, at least. Why are they holding back at all? They must know our bullets will run out if they just storm the place. Maybe they're all just waiting for another person to go first. Hello? Came a frantic voice in the earpiece. It wasn't McCormick. The comms team must have swapped over during the 2 days. Instead, it was a voice Kate had missed almost as much. Raj? She cried. She put the phone in front of her face, but saw the screen was blank. In the midst of anxiety and sensory overload, she had forgotten to make it a video call and missed the chance to see her boyfriend's face again. Kate? You're alive? Yeah, for now. There's a crowd of people after us. I mean, actual people, prisoners. Raj's happy voice died a quick death. You're not. Put it on speaker, came Lorraine's whisper in the background, another voice that felt like soft music in Kate's ears. You're in the inner city? Asked Raj. How on earth did that happen? Ewan tricked a laser cannon into blasting a hole in the wall. It was our only escape. We may have been better off dying in that corridor, though, Kate thought, as somebody entered a screaming match against Charlie. He was only silenced when the teenager threatened him with a handgun and yelled something about not wanting to miss his birthday party. Who's with you? Asked Lorraine. It was a kind euphemism for asking who was still alive, and even Kate could see through it. Ewan, Charlie, and Jack, she replied, blocking the thought of Ewan and that faraway gunshot. But Alex, I don't think. Her voice trailed off. Her heart started to punch the front of her chest. She was dealing with too many emotional topics at once. Kate, said Raj with delight in his voice, Alex got out. He spent the last 2 days in the nearby village, recovering from a shoulder wound. He's waiting to see if you guys made it. And that was enough. The tears started to flow, not through sadness, but through the intense cocktail of good and bad emotions. The wonder of Alex's survival against the unknown fate of Ewan, the joy of hearing Raj against the fright of hearing Grant, her confusion about Alex's selfless loyalty to his doomed team against her guilt for ever thinking negative thoughts about him. Kate? Asked Raj. I don't have much time, she began. So, 2 minutes, whispered Jack, who couldn't tell it was the wrong moment to hurry her. Okay, it's even worse than we thought in here. Everyone's built their houses from wood and metal and stuff that's been thrown down to them. It's miles and miles of crowded floor space. People die here all the time, but this place is still crowded. It's like Kate dipped her gaze to the sticky floor and realised she had neither the time nor the skill to come up with a decent analogy. New London could not be compared to anything she had ever experienced. Anyway, she continued, we made some enemies, and a few minutes ago, Grant offered a reward for our deaths, so now the whole city's trying to kill us. What kind of reward? Asked Lorraine. Is it something people would kill for? Their food supply. The silence after her words was dreadful. Kate shuddered and planned to fill up and filled up the silence with more words. We're planning to break out, she said. Hopefully the same way we got in. We just need to get our weapons back. Outside, a lady pushed her two malnourished daughters in front of her. After saying their names, she begged Charlie for the chance to kill him. And if we survive the night, Kate continued, we'll strike at dawn, as long as the streets aren't crowded. Good luck, said Raj. I'll be praying for you all. 1 minute left, said Jack. I think we'll need more than faith, Raj. I'm sorry to say this, Kate, but faith is one thing you've never been good at. Kate wasn't sure whether to feel surprised or hurt. Her brain chose both. What's that supposed to mean? Kate, I know you've been through a ton of horrible stuff in your life, but religious or not, have faith in something. Maybe you should have faith in yourself. The phone trembled in Kate's hand. She could have sworn she heard Lorraine in the background, whispering something like, about time someone said it. And worst of all, they weren't wrong. Right back to her childhood years, there had been very little for Kate to love about herself. Her gymnastics expertise may have stopped her from being completely drowned in self esteem issues, but once the gym chalk left her hands, there'd been nothing else to help her. Maybe in a world full of autistic people, she'd have been appreciated, but the real world had never seen her as worthy of respect, so neither had she. This wasn't the time to talk about her faults, especially the incurable ones. Faith in herself was impossible when she didn't even like herself. She dodged the point as well as she could. I'd rather have bullets than a belief, she said. I'm not arguing against having weapons, said Raj. I'm saying never underestimate faith or having a positive opinion about yourself. Faith can turn a person's life around with just thoughts. Think about it, that's amazing. The only thing bullets can do is kill people. There was a rumble from outside, like the sound of unorganized mass footsteps. Yeah, they seem to be pretty good at that. It happened too fast for Kate to see it. She heard a grunt from Charlie and half yell from Jack before they fell silent, and by the time she turned her head, they lay unconscious on the dark concrete. Charlie's pistol had vanished from his hand, held in some henchman's fierce grip. He was followed by another two of the Lord's men, assault rifles in their arms and grins on their faces. That's why the crowd never stormed the building, Kate thought. They were waiting for the professionals to do it for them. I'm sorry, she yelled to Raj and Lorraine. We're dead. I love you guys. Goodbye. End of chapter 21. And I hate to say it, but chapter 22 doesn't take place in the inner city. That is the last you see of the Underdogs, the strike team tonight.
Do they die? I mean, I know you're not going to tell me.
Yeah, were you expecting to go, yes? Well, I'd rather just keep completely silent on this and let you feel everything that I intended you to feel when I wrote it.
No, Chris.
I do feel like an utter bastard.
No.
Right.
Does that continue in chapter 23? Okay.
Yes, chapter 23 does appear and does take place in a city.
So you said we can't have our session, well, in August because it's going to be slow for you, and from July 15th to August, I will be traveling as well. So you want us to wait that long?
Well, thing is, there are 28 chapters in the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
After this upcoming chapter, we've got 6 left. In fact, wait, let me check how chapter 25 ends. Oh dear. Okay, it's that one. Okay, I can't really leave it on chapter 25 because that really would be quite cruel. So there's two possibilities. We have 2 sessions, and one of them's 2 chapters, one of them's 4 chapters. Probably the one like right at the end have a 4 chapter special to finish off the book. or we have a 6-chapter uh, absolute marathon, which I'm not sure I have the energy for.
Let's do
That
two
might
and
be a discussion for another time.
let's do 2 and 4. I think that would be better. But yeah, let's give it some time to think
Okay.
about it.
Yeah.
I'm not
Let me check
sure.
out chapter 24 ends. Yeah, that's okay.
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 Okay. Okay.
You're doing okay.
I am. It's just not a good cliffhanger. It's just gonna give me.
Okay. Well, chapter
I mean, as a
22.
writer,
What?
it's a very great cliffhanger. Don't take me wrong, but it's as a
Okay.
reader,
It's
to
not a
Rofe's
friendly
point.
cliffhanger. Yeah.
Rofe has written
Okay.
it quite
For what
accurately.
it's worth, chapter 22 is a very calm chapter. In fact, I think it's the only calm chapter in the whole of the second half. So here's where
Was
we
your
kind of
heart
slow
break
things down
down?
a bit.
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
cut you off again, but I'm just trying to
Um,
process everything.
yeah. Don't blame me. So let's slow things down with a nice McCormick chapter.
Oh, McCormick,
Chapter
I miss you.
22. McCormick was in his bed, or on it at least. He had been too lethargic to pull the covers over himself. It must have been early afternoon. He hadn't wasted a whole morning in bed for nearly 2 years, but it was a frighteningly comfortable addiction. You can't get into this habit, Polly's voice sounded in his head, echoing lines from years gone by. Just to remind you, Polly was the lady who used to look after him after the death of his wife, Barbara. Echoing lines from years gone by. You'll lose everything you are. Those words had helped, back when he had only lost his wife. They were less comforting than after he had lost a war. McCormick checked his watch and sighed. Any longer, and he would have to pretend he was ill. The expectations of his surviving housemates forced him to the edge of his bed, and he slid his feet into the nearest pair of shoes. He mopped his brow with a limp hand, and tried to put his leader face back on. His first stop was the clinic. Shannon made no reaction as he brushed open the door. She was sitting alone on her bed, staring at the ceiling as if counting cracks. She seemed to do little else with her days, content to keep herself isolated and inactive. Perhaps being alive was enough. Shannon, McCormick said, to no response. Just days ago, he had thought of her silence as a sign of vulnerability, but his friends were missing while she was safe. Vulnerable or not, the girl on the bed had lost the right to remain silent. You must know about our mission to Hartford, he said. I've given you a few days before asking about Lieutenant Lambourne, but we need to get to the bottom of it. No answer. We found the people you lived with, including him, and I'm sorry. No answer. McCormick's tone was unusually impatient, and he knew why. He could no longer deny that Shannon was the reason his friends were missing. She may not have pulled any triggers, but perhaps the world might have been better off if Tyler had completed his mission. It was an uncharacteristic thought, and McCormick hated it. When you're comfortable talking, he said, I need to know how you came to live in that health centre, and why one of Grant's lieutenants was living with you, and how you were found. Because if it can happen there, it can happen here. No questions asked, Shannon said. That was the deal. Way back in chapter 3, that was the deal. McCormick sighed. He had almost forgotten that catchphrase. Can you at least tell me what my friends are supposed to do with better days? As in the USB stick. Shannon turned her head away from the ceiling above her, eyebrows raised. You think they're alive, she said, amused. I hope they're alive. And if they are, they need to know what to do once they're in the clone factory. To keep up your part of the deal, what do you think? Asked Shannon. Find a computer and plug in the memory stick. And then? Then you activate the kill switch on the wall, red lever somewhere at the back. McCormick said nothing. He wanted the silence to feel like encouragement for her to continue, but instead it just felt cold. Lindborn and I wrote a software code that would override the factory's safeguards, she said. Those settings that stop the wrong liquids going down the wrong pipes, or the cubicle doors from opening before soldiers are fully grown. After that, it reverses as many processes as it can to make the machines choke on their own backwash. To run the software, throw the switch back on and watch the fun. Throw a grenade down there for good measure if you want. Some of the spilt liquids will be flammable. Of course, McCormick thought, all this information is useless if the strike team are dead. I'm tired of not knowing, and Lorraine has been at comms with Raj for more than 24 hours. I think it's time for a swap. Thank you, Shannon, McCormick said, out of courtesy and little more. Lorraine will be back with you soon. Shannon reverted back to silent mode, and McCormick was happy to leave her alone to stare at the clinic ceiling. But before he could leave Spitfire's Rise, there was one more conversation that needed to happen. Conveniently, Mark's bedroom was next door. "Took you long enough," he muttered when McCormick entered. "Excuse me?" "The police got to me in 6 minutes last time I broke the rules. When I lead a mission outside of your authority, it takes you 2 days to show up." "I was hoping you would use the time to reflect," McCormick replied. It was partly true. Mark shrugged his bulky shoulders and went back to reading his book. "Mark, I don't have long. Then let me go through the main points you're about to mention. Yes, I disobeyed your greater wisdom. No, I don't regret it. Yes, we learnt a ton from it. The only thing left to discuss is what the hell you can do about it." He waited until the end of his little speech before looking in McCormick's direction, pressuring him to give an answer. "So you don't already know that too?" asked McCormick, resisting the urge to add, since you're clearly the cleverest person in the building." Sinking to Mark's level would do him no favours. "Some months ago," Mark answered, "Miles and Tim did a similar thing. You kept them at home for a month as punishment. And they weren't 18 like me. They were proper adults. So that was a ballsy move. But you won't do that now." "And why not?" "Partly because the next time you let them out, Oliver Roth killed Miles with a shotgun blast to the face. Maybe it was a month's lack of practice, or maybe just coincidence. I guess we'll never know. But, but the main reason is because you can't afford to keep me at home. Who else is left to lead the charge? Gracie? Silent Simon?" Mark was right, and McCormick knew it. Thankfully, he had known for a long time, so the words did not shock him. "Mark," he began, "I know you've spent most of your teenage years with crime and punishment at the front of your mind, but there's more to the underdogs than that. I don't expect you to follow our rules just because you fear the consequences. I expect you to follow them because it's the right thing to do." Mark turned back to reading his book. "You're right," McCormick continued. "There's very little I can do. Even if I dish out a punishment, it won't be enough to stop you making the wrong choices. The only person who can do that is you. About 100 teachers gave me the same talk about making the right. This is so much more about following rules, Mark. If the worst has happened, if you and Alex really are the last soldiers capable of leadership, then you've got an even bigger question to ask. What kind of head soldier do you want to be? And if the war really is lost, you've got the biggest question of all. What kind of man do you want to die as? Leadership changes people, Mark. That in itself is a responsibility. You need to let yourself be changed in the right direction." Mark turned the page of his book. It was better than a sarcastic comeback, at least. Mark and Shannon both giving me the silent treatment. Maybe this is what parenting would have been like. He left the bedroom and took a deep breath. He would make the journey to comms alone after saying goodbye to the others. But first things first. Stood on the landing, making one final check for passers-by, he reached into the nearest empty bedroom to borrow a chair. He opened the trapdoor in the ceiling and pulled down the ladder. In the past, he had lied to his team by saying he had to check the attic for rats. Ewan had even called him out on it before the mission began. I think that was like, what, chapter 5, I think? In reality, he had given up the fight against rodents a long time ago, but there was a tradition that had to be kept every time he left Spitfire's Rise. McCormick closed the trapdoor and concealed himself inside the attic, the only part of the house where he knew he could truly be alone, then crawled to the aging cardboard box next to the boiler. Nobody else knew whose house the underdogs had taken over, with the sole exception of Ewan. What they did not know, they could not give away through interrogation. It was a safe assumption that Daniel Amopoulos, the last one to be captured, had given away everyone's names before he died. Thankfully, he could not give away the location of Spitfire's Rise. By twisted fortune, Grant had captured the one underdog with such severe directional dyslexia that he couldn't even have been able to describe the route. McCormick could never tell his soldiers that each day they walked on his carpets, slept in his beds, and ate from his cupboards. Last year, letting a dozen people into his home would have been a Christmas party. Now it was his life 24/7. His honeymoon photo was the first object out of the memory box. 41 years and 8 months after being taken, the photo still portrayed Barbara with the natural elegance he had always remembered about her. That moment in Anglesey, sealed for eternity in a flawless glass frame. With a gentle brush to wipe the dust from her face, he gave her a kiss as always. Barbara McCormick, now 3 years dead, had made Joseph McCormick the man he was. She could never have known the responsibility the future would place on her husband, but somehow she had prepared him for it. With Britain in ruins and his people all but conquered, Joseph owed it to her memory, to be the man she had built him up to be. He owed it to her to keep others safe, even if it meant hiding them in his own home. End of chapter 22. There you go. Ending with a nice twist. Spitfire's Rise is McCormick's house.
Yeah. Okay, so Spitfire's Rise is McCormick's house. Who knows what's happening to Charlie and Jack? Uh, and Ewan,
They're unconscious, but that's the last we saw of them just before Kate hung up the phone.
yes. And then Shannon's not speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Mark's not speaking either.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're we're
Thomas
gonna
hasn't even appeared.
this was
I,
quite a marathon. Yeah, this was a
oh yeah,
better place to break. Rofe, you're right. And hey,
yes,
Mark,
I
place to
I would
pay.
agree.
I'm glad you're here. Um, but we're just about to wrap it up. I We're gonna have another one of these sessions very soon. We'll discuss with Chris, and we're gonna finish this book because we need to know what happened to a few of our favorite underdogs.
Mm, yeah.
I always thought McCormick had a sensitive side, Steph. I always thought like for some reason, I always thought of him as a person who was hopelessly in love with his wife. And I don't know if that's true though, but like this tiny
It's
scene,
a nice way of describing him. I mean, he's been through a lot of challenges. There's a separate short story where McCormick's the main character, and it starts a few minutes before his wife dies in the hospital next to him, and then it covers the following months where he tries to recover from it. And part of that story is about him coming to remember what it was that he loved about life. So yeah, he he's very much a people person, not so much in the social sense, but in the fact that people bring meaning to his life, and that's why he's been so hurt by the book's events, because he honestly believes that pretty much everyone he loves is dead. It even says earlier in the book that one of the thoughts he's trying to avoid is the fact that all of the young people that he and Barbara spent decades building up, every single one of them are either dead or imprisoned by now. So the underdogs, the surviving underdogs, are the sole remains of his and Barbara's life's work.
imagine it
He's got a
takes.
lot to contend with.
He does, and it takes all of this to happen before he could even have a thought like, I wish Keith Tyler had done what he intended to do in terms of Shannon,
Mm,
right? So it took that amount of stuff to happen before even that thought came
yes.
to his mind.
Mm,
So yeah, he's a strong man though. It looks like it.
mm.
But that
Yeah.
being said, any new projects that you would want to share or any updates?
Well, the the new autism book, "What Do You Love Most About Life," which features Steph and one of your sons,
Yes.
is just days away from being sent to the printers, and give it 4 or 5 weeks or so, which should start being sent out. And then there's the children's book, Alfie Smith Speedcuber, as it's just been renamed. Rather annoyingly, the publisher suddenly realised that last year it published a book called Being Oscar, and they didn't want
Oh,
two
have the same.
books with Oscar in the title. I think Being Oscar is also a neurodivergent related book as well. So after looking at lots of options, the only one they found was to change Oscar's name. So Oscar Smith is now Alfie Smith.
How are you
Alfie Smith
relating to that?
Speedcuber. I believe one day I will see Oscar as an Alfie.
Okay.
One thing that kind of encourages me is that, um, in fact, you know what? Let's go through the names of the underdogs, and
Okay.
I will tell you what their names used to be. Kate Harris
Oh,
Smith
gee.
used to, going back to the list in
Yeah, the
chapter
list.
2.
Got it.
Kate Harris Smith used to be Kate Teal.
Ah,
Thiel. It was named after someone he knew in Germany, but no one would know how to pronounce it. And also, I wanted her name to be first in the alphabet, so I could have her name on the first of the list, so it's the first thing she sees. And also, Aerosmith is such a cool name. Charlie Coleman, he was originally Chris Smith, Chris with a Kris. Then that
ah,
got changed to Chris Smith, Chris Smith, and then it got changed to Charlie, and then Charlie Comments. Yeah, but he's had loads of names. Gracie Freeman used to be Frankie Freehart. Alex Ginelli, he used to be Ross Ginelli. The reason I changed his name from Ross to Alex was because there's also an Oliver Roth in there, and having a Ross and a Roth is messy.
Yeah.
Mark Gunnison used to be Craig Gunnison. My personal favourite, Jack Hopper, used to be Roy Hopper. Except no children are called Roy anymore. But I wanted something very kind of old fashioned. Eventually, I settled on Jack because Jack is an old name and a young name. You get people in their 80s called Jack, and you get people who are very young children called Jack. And that's basically Jack Hopper as well. He is an old man and a young child. Thomas Foster, yeah, he used to be called Thomas Rex because I wanted him to be T-Rex, but I thought that's just a bit silly. Let's just say T-Rex is his nickname, so it's Thomas Foster. Lorraine Shepherd used to be Eve Shepherd. Raj Singh used to be Luke Singh. Ewan West has always been Ewan West, and Simon Young has always been Simon Young. So yeah, and yeah, Shannon's always had the first name of Shannon, but there's other things about her character that's changed as Underdogs has gone through various drafts.
I have
But
a
yeah,
question.
2 out of 12 have stuck with their original names. So you know what? Maybe I can get used to Alfie Smith. Okay,
But
you said
I
you
have
had a
a
question.
quick question. Yes,
Mhm.
there is in the underdogs list. There is a guy named Temur Shirazi, who I'm
Please
believing
God.
is of Muslim descent. Yeah. So there is another guy we were talking about in the chapter. I forgot
Yes,
what his full
Adnan
name was.
Shah.
What was it? Adnan Shah. Oh, I thought he was Adnan Shirazi. So I thought maybe those two were related
Oh
or
no,
something like that. So
no,
no.
no, not related at all. Adnan Shah is the chief architect of the Northern Wall. Aryan and Taimur Shirazi were underdogs uh, who died in a raid on McCormick's old university when Jack, the Shirazi brothers, and this lady called Elaine, the four of them went to steal the electricity generator. Only Jack came back alive.
I'm glad he did
So
though.
yes, he's
Mm.
quite protective of that generator, as you can imagine.
Yes.
That might be a short story that one day I'll write.
Mm.
Jack going out and coming back, having left the other.
You are doing some of these
I don't want it. It would
on
hurt.
your Patreon, right?
Say again, sorry. Hmm?
I said you are doing some of these short stories on Patreon, right?
Oh, yes. Yes, Patreon supporters have access to all of the Underdog short stories, except for the 3 that I've not yet uploaded, one of which is Oliver Roth's, one of which is Kate's, and is that it? Have I? No, I think I have uploaded Shannon's, but don't you dare read Shannon's story because it gives away so much.
No, I'm
Uh,
not reading
uh,
anything until we finish this book. And
yeah,
then I'm going to read those. But it doesn't
yeah.
give spoilers to the other books, does it?
I will. I don't think Shannon's does. I think as soon as you've finished book 1, you're probably safe to read. I would still advise reading up to the end of book 3 and then reading Shannon simply because there aren't any spoilers, but it's just a richer experience if you read Shannon's story already knowing everything there is to know about Shannon. As for the others, like Ewan's short story is His First Day at Oakenfold. I read that to a couple of my students who have never read Underdogs. It's a complete standalone story. McCormick's story is a standalone as well, but again, it's a richer experience if you know who he is and what kind of person he is. Jack's is a standalone. That's a bit of a difficult read, but it is a standalone. Kate's as well, though not so below that one yet. Oliver Roth, you need to have read. Actually, come to think of it, now that I know, because I'd forgotten, now that I know that's the backstory of how he came to rise through the ranks and become chief assassin isn't actually explained in book 1. It's explained in book 2. You definitely should wait until you know that needs to be because well, you could you could read it right now, and it's a very interesting story with quite a plot twist in the middle. but it's not a plot twist at all if you know that it's coming because you've read the main books.
Okay.
That's
I'll
one of my
just hold up.
favorites
I'll
because
just hold up.
whereas whereas the others are short stories, most of them happen on the same day. Oliver Roth's is split into 12 parts. It's the year between 1 year before Takeover Day, 11 months before Takeover Day, 10 months before Takeover Day, 9 months before Takeover Day, and the final chapter is him talking to his mum on the phone for the last time on Takeover Day and telling her what he thinks. But I'm not going to say anything more about that. I think you already know that his parents were kind of apathetic and just saw him kind of as something tacked on to the side of the family rather than. But yeah, it's it's a slow-paced story of how this 12-year-old boy uh, who was just kind of bored in life ends up becoming promoted to lead assassin, and he's 13 when Takeover Day happens, and he is cursed with being given everything that he's ever wanted without any boundaries or discipline, and it completely destroys him. Oliver Roth, the more you read about him, the more you come to realize exactly how tragic his character is. Because I wouldn't say you feel sorry for him, but he is what could happen to every young person without any guidance. That's an interesting question. Do I find myself rechecking my own canon often in the writing process, or is it mostly locked in? Um, I did that tonight. I had to check. Wait, hold on. Is that does that happen in this chapter, or does it happen in book two? But in terms of actually, that's just the order of events rather than what's actually canon. Most of the Underdogs canon I have basically just memorized. There's a lot of head canon as well, like things that are true to me. I haven't written them down in the novels because I don't want them to be really, really prescriptive. They're just mm, trying to think of an example. I also don't want to limit other people's theories, and there are two ones that I really like uh, that were given to me by the students of a teacher who's one of my patron supporters. They gave me two interesting fan theories, and I thought, you know what, I can't prove them wrong, and actually they're in danger of convincing me. Really, unfortunately, I can't tell you what they are because uh, they require knowledge of events in book two. But yeah, I do have my own headcanon about some things which I've deliberately kept out because you know when J.K. Rowling she did a similar thing by just announcing one day, "Oh yeah, Albus Dumbledore is gay." I know it doesn't say anything about it in the books. I'm just going to declare it right now, and well, yeah, it's canon now because I said it. And a lot of people were very critical about that because, well, first off, plus representation doesn't look like mentioning nothing in the books, but just saying it to the readers outside of it. That's just not how it works. Um, Sometimes people ask me, "Are any of the underdogs LGBT plus?" And I do have my own theories, but I'm not going to do what J.K. Rowling did. Also, I wouldn't want to influence other people's opinions of it because other people have opinions about it as well, and I don't want to prove them right or wrong. I'd rather just give them the freedom.
Maybe one of your fans would like to write a spin-off of, you know, series of one of these characters, like their own version of stories, giving their theories. That would be an interesting read too. That being said, it was 9 p.m. at your time when we started,
Oh yeah,
um,
it's
and
quarter
now
past
it's
10.
14.
I
So
was just having fun, didn't notice.
I'm glad you were having fun. I just didn't want you to feel obligated to stay longer than you have to.
Oh,
So,
it's fine. I love a good geek out. But oh yes, and mate, you're absolutely right. People do love to ship. They really do. And I've not yet seen it. Oh yeah, one of the most rewarding moments of my life as an author. Bear in mind, I started writing when I was 12. I was writing Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction from a younger cousin. It was just loads and loads of fun. And then from that, I graduated to writing my own characters, my own worlds. And then there came a day when I found Underdogs fan fiction online. I couldn't believe it. It was beautiful.
Oh, so
I have
there's
not
already
yet
something like
seen the type of fan fiction that Moat is talking about, but well, yeah.
that.
A couple of the Geeks 7 fans is I'm not sure if that's referencing something that I'm not aware of, but uh, but yeah, you know what? Because that is now in my head, I am now going to check if any. Nope, there's still 10 pieces of Underdogs fan fiction on this particular website. There was 11, but one of them got deleted.
Why?
People upload and fan fiction, then delete their accounts fairly commonly, actually. Although uh, perhaps one of the misjudgments I made was that most authors just leave the fan fiction alone, don't get involved. But I just felt so thankful that yes, I did leave a comment saying, "I'm actually the author of this series. Thanks so much. This means such a lot." And one of the authors said, "Oh, yeah, wow, this is quite an honor. Thank you very much for letting me know." And the other one, well, I didn't get a response from that person. A little while later, their account was deleted, and I don't know. I'm assuming that it was because of me. I might be wrong, but my anxiety is telling me it was you and your comment. I don't know. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But the annoying thing is, this fan had written a a very good piece of fanfic based on something that happened before the start of the series, which actually has a chapter devoted to it in the final Underdogs book. I cannot say
Oh.
anything other than that, other than something is revealed in the third book that you get a flashback for in the fourth book, and this person who read to the end of the third book had written their own version of it, and I'm now thinking, oh, when this person reads the fourth book, I really hope they don't think that I took inspiration from what they wrote because, yeah, it was always the plan to have this flashback chapter in the final book. But yeah, maybe I should have done the wiser
I'm
thing
not
and
gonna
just left the
skip
fan
books.
fiction alone. What's that?
Uh,
Sorry.
I said I'm not gonna skip books. I'm gonna read it one by one because I don't want to kind of like know what's gonna happen in the end and not know what happened in the middle. So I'm not gonna do that. But any parting words for us, Chris?
United by differences, everyone.
That's Rofa's favorite slogan as well. United by differences. All right, let's say it together, Chris. One, two, three. United by difference.
United by differences.
Oh, we
Right.
that's okay. All right, thank you so much,
Oh,
Chris. I know you were
all right.
tired, and you still did it for us. I appreciate you so much.
That's right.
And hopefully we can plan the marathon very soon.
Okay.
And yeah, I am looking forward to starting book two, possibly. If you are
Okay.
interested, we'll talk
This
about
has
it.
been a decent experience, so I might.
Thank you so much. All right, I will
Okay.
see you soon
All
then.
right. Take care.
Don't be a stranger. Bye bye.
Bye.
And